Pinball's video podcast on game room equipment. The next style of game in the pinball evolution came about in about 1960, and that's what's known as a metal rail game. Again, the rails along the side of the game are made of metal, hence a metal rail. This particular game is by Gottlieb and is known as a wedge head. You'll hear that terminology a lot when people talk about single-player Gottlieb games. And it's called a wedge head because the back box, which is this unit up here, is shaped like a wedge. That is, it's wider on top than it is towards the bottom. All wedge head games are single-player games. Just keep that in mind. Also by 1960, all games were using score reels for their scoring. Light box scoring was no longer used. Everything was basically using score reels, whether it be single player or multiplayer. Another thing that happened in the late 60s was a change from 2-inch flippers, like I've seen here, to the longer 3-inch flippers, which greatly changed the dynamics of the gameplay. We're going to take a little break from all this, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Hi there, it's Bob from Bob Inc. And if you want to get metal rail games in your collection and you're looking for something a little different, we've got a part for you. What you talking about, Bob?
Well, Bob, you take this game kit, move it with these customized 2x4s that we customize to fit your game. And then you take some ordinary hand tools and you attach them to your game. And this is giving you a wood rail game. It's an amazing product you need to have.
Well, as you can see here, this thing is really easy to install in this here game, and you can get it at any pinball retailer all over the United States here. This is made in the USA, not freaking Australia. What's somewhere else you can get it there, Bob?
You can get it at bobandbobinc.com, right there on your page, right there.
Amazing quality! Thanks, Bob and Bob! Let's get back to the information, my man. Here's a multiplayer game. That is, up to 4 people can play at one time. And I can see that because on the back glass, which is this glass with the graphics on it, this is known as the score glass or back glass. I have up to 4 players worth of score reels that can be seen. Player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. Now, they came out with multiplayer games starting in 1956, but by the late 60s they became very, very prevalent because they were more of a moneymaker for the manufacturers. That is, they could charge more for a 4-player game than they could charge for a single-player game. So sales of multiplayer games really skyrocketed in the late 60s and through the 70s. Now, these games are still electromechanical, and these games are very, very readily available because they made a boatload of them during the 1970s. Here's the inside of a typical electromechanical game. You can see motorized scoring device here, mechanical stepping units here, relays all lined up here, transformer up here, chime boxes to make the traditional electromechanical sounds. Next in the pin game evolution, what's known as solid-state games. That is, instead of using electromechanical devices, score reels, and stepper units, and motors to control the game, you now have a computer that lies behind this back glass. So this game from 1978 is a Williams Phoenix, and it actually has a computer back here, a very early computer, but it's still a computer not unlike what you're using to watch this video right now. With the advent of computers, all solid-state games are basically 4-player games. There are some exceptions, but 99.9% of the games are going to be 4-player games because now there's memory to remember, for instance, how many targets a particular player scored, how many drop targets they hit, how high they got in the bonus. The computer can remember all that stuff. Back in the electromechanical era, you couldn't remember those things. That's why every ball, every player, the game would reset all the game features because there was no way for the game to remember how many targets you had hit, how far you had advanced into the rule sets. So with the advent of solid-state computers, and the game can remember where each player has progressed through the game, that was the big feature behind solid-state games and why a lot of people like them. Because all of a sudden the rules got a lot deeper, that is, more complicated, with more things to do and achieve and accomplish, and yet it still was a 4-player game, meaning that you could have head-to-head competition. So a lot of people like solid-state games because of that. Early solid-state games used what's known as numeric displays. That is, these have no capability to display text unless they can make it out of the segments used on each one of these numbers for the display. This particular game is also 6 digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Later games will actually move to 7 digits so that you can score over 1,000,000 points. Another important feature of most solid-state games is solid-state sound. That is, when you start a game, you get some sort of sound, and while you play the game, you get sound too. Now, because this is an early game, there's no background sound. That's kind of unusual, and by the late 70s, most games are playing music in the background, even when the ball is not scoring on any targets. Also, by about 1979, you'll see games starting to talk. They won't have a lot of vocabulary, and it may not be easy to understand, but they will talk. By 1986, just about all games talk, and the speech is considerably better, much more clear, and with a greater vocabulary. The solid-state computer in the back box of this 1978 Williams Phoenix. This kind of gives you an idea of what lives back there and controls this game is in fact a computer. Starting about 1986, solid-state games advanced to having alphanumeric score displays. That is, the displays had more segments per each digit, meaning that they could easily display not only numbers, but text too. So on this particular game, Earthshakers by Williams, 1989, you can see that I have high score initials and also words going across the screen describing features of the game. The games also became much more advanced. Of course, this is a progression of events, and as time goes on, things tend to get more complicated because the rules are deeper and there's more to do, more playfield toys, more ramps, and other devices and wire forms on the playfield. The companies really got into using plastic ramps to move the ball around at different levels within the game, and also wire forms to bring the ball back to the player, again, at different levels in the game. You'll start to see that more by the mid-'80s and used extensively once we hit the '90s. The last and current style of solid-state pinball game came about around 1991 with the advent of what's known as a dot matrix score display. Instead of having individual scores for each player that were either numeric or alphanumeric, you now had a score display which could actually draw graphics, pictures, and actually miniature little movies on the screen. So they could use any font they wanted and animate basically anything they wanted on the screen. Again, this came around 1991, 1992, and is the style of game that is used today. Again, solid state with their computer back behind the score glass, running all this stuff with the dot matrix display. Now we're going to talk about some general pinball terminology, things you need to know in order to talk intelligently about a game.